and welcome to Chapter 3, Section 7, Solving Absolute Value Inequalities. So today we're going to look at solving absolute value equations with the inequality portion stuck in. So if you remember, the first thing we have to do is get the absolute value on one side of the equation. That's our first step. So I need the absolute value portion by itself. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, and the absolute value of x is smaller than 9. Now I have two problems. I have x is smaller than 9, and because it's negative, the sign flips. X is larger than negative 9. And I have to graph these two problems. So I have an open circle on positive 9, and x is smaller than it, and I have an open circle on negative 9, and x is larger than it. So the graph for this problem is this. Absolute value of x plus 4 is smaller than or equal to 2. Already my absolute value is the only thing on this side of the equation, so I can just go ahead and solve both of these problems. I have x plus 4 is greater than or equal to positive 2, and I have x plus 4 is, is greater than or equal to negative 2, because this flips. Now I subtract 4 from both sides. I subtract 4 from both sides. Here, 2 and negative 4 makes negative 2. X is smaller than or equal to negative 2. Here, negative 2 and negative 4 is negative 6. So x is larger than or equal to negative 6. So I have a closed circle on negative 2, and x is smaller than that. I have a closed circle on negative 6, and x is larger than that. So this is my graph for this problem. Now, if you're understanding the concept behind this, the absolute value of x is smaller than 3. This talks about all of the numbers whose distance from 0 is less than 3. The absolute value of this is going to be less than this number. And because it's less than the number, then the negative is going to also be more than the number. This means it crosses 0. So when the absolute value is smaller than your number, this is going to be an and statement. And your dots are going to connect in the middle when you graph them, because x is going to be smaller than 3 and x is going to be larger than negative 3. When the absolute value of x is larger than your number, that talks about all the numbers whose distance from 0 is greater than 5. So it doesn't include the numbers 0 through 5, positive or negative, because it's greater than that. These are or statements. When the absolute value is bigger than the number, it does not cross 0, and it's an or statement. So this becomes x is greater than 5 and x is less than negative 5. Greater than 5, less than negative 5. So if the absolute value is greater than the number, it's going to not cross 0. It does not include 0. So let's put some of these into practice. I want to get my absolute value by itself, so the first thing I'm going to do is add 20 to both sides. The absolute value of x is greater than 7, which means x is greater than 7 and x is less than negative 7. X is greater than 7. This is going to be an or statement. So I have an open circle at 7 and negative 7. 7 and negative 7. X is greater than 7 and x is less than negative 7. And this graphs in this way. X minus 8 plus 5 is greater than or equal to 11. I want to get this by itself, so I'm going to start by subtracting 5 from both sides. And the absolute value of x minus 8 is greater than or equal to 6. Now I can solve both of the problems. X minus 8 is greater than or equal to 6, and x minus 8 is less than or equal to negative 6. Add 8 to both sides, and x is greater than or equal to 14. Add 8 to both sides, and x is less than or equal to positive 2. So here I'm going to have a closed circle at 14, and x is greater than that. I have a closed circle at 2, and x is less than that. These are or statements. Please make sure if you have any questions, you ask me. Find your points. Decide if they're open or closed. And then find the direction of your arrows. These are your basic graphing steps. I found my points. I decided that they were, don't put a line there. I decided that they were open because they did not say equal to, and my x is bigger than this, my x is smaller than this, and that tells me what direction they go in. Go ahead and do check it out. Numbers 1 and 2. Pause the video and come back when you're done. Check it out. Number 1 has 2 times the absolute value of x is smaller than or equal to 6. So the first thing I have to do is divide both sides by 2 to get my absolute value. And then I solve both of them, remembering that the negative 1 flips. So I have 6 and negative 6, and both are closed circles. X is smaller than 6 and larger than negative 6, so this is an and. Here I have to get my negative 4.5 on the other side of the equation so that my absolute value is by itself. And then I can take this and split it into 2. And x is smaller than 9, so I have a closed circle at 9 and a closed circle at negative 15, and this line connects. This is also an and. Check it out, number 2. I have to get my 10 on the other side so that I can split this equation into 2. I have a closed circle at 2 and negative 2. X is larger than 2 and smaller than negative 2. I get my half on this side, so I can split my absolute value up. I subtract 2.5 from both sides, and x is greater than or equal to 1, less than or equal to negative 6. So I have a closed circle at 1 and at negative 6, and x is greater than this and less than that. If you have any questions, please ask. We have a word problem where with fire extinguishers, the water pressure should be 162.5 psi, which means per square inch, but it's acceptable for the pressure to differ by 12.5 in either direction. So your difference is the answer, and in the absolute value is pressure minus the perfect one, because the answer to this difference can't be any greater than 12.5, but it can equal 12.5. So we're going to set this up to be P minus 162.5 is less than or equal to 12.5, and P minus 162.5 is greater than or equal to negative 12.5. And we're going to solve this problem by adding 162.5 to both sides of both equations. So we end up with P is smaller than or equal to 175, and P is larger than or equal to 150. So we have two closed circles, one on 150, one on 175, and P comes in between the two. Then we have special cases with absolute value. And so again, we're looking for the times when all numbers work and the times when no numbers work. So we are going to solve this as usual. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 7 from both sides. and I have the absolute value of x minus 6 is larger than negative 5. And here's what I want you to see. An absolute value of something is always positive. And to say that the absolute value of something is going to be greater than negative 5 is going to be always true. So if you end up with a negative number next to an absolute value, your answer is all real numbers. Because anything that you stick in here is going to make this true. Every positive answer is going to be greater than negative 5. Here, if we add 5 to both sides, we have the absolute value of x plus 12 is smaller than or equal to negative 1. Here we have a number that is always going to be positive because it's an absolute value, and this is saying it's going to be smaller than a negative number, and that is false. That is never going to be true. So your answer is no solution. So before you take the time to work all of them out, if your answer in an absolute value problem is a negative number, double check and make sure that you can't just stop where you are. Go ahead and do check it out numbers 3 and 4. Pause the video and come back when you're done. Check it out number 3. The fire extinguisher should be pressurized to 125 with a value differing by at most 75, which means it can include 75, so it's less than or equal to. So we're going to break that into two. We're going to add 125 to both sides, and we're going to go somewhere between 50 and 200 as acceptable pressure readings. And it says graph the solutions, and I didn't. So for A, once you subtract, for check it out number 4, once we add 9 to both sides to get absolute value of x by itself, we realize that the absolute value of x is going to be larger than a negative number, and so we know that all real numbers can be the solution here. Here, once we divide each side by 4 to get x minus 3.5 all by itself, we realize that the absolute value of this is supposed to be smaller than negative 2. And we know that that can't happen. A positive can't be smaller than a negative, so this answer is no solution. Your homework for this section, it starts on page 215. It's numbers 26 to 49. Once you're finished with this section, we're done with chapter 3 and we're ready to do the review problems that start on page 220, and you're going to do all 83 of them. You will have 2 days of class to work on this. A day just to work, a day to finish work, answer questions, and correct so that you can be ready for your test. So please know that that's coming up, and make sure you don't have any questions you need to ask me. You know that you can solve any problem here. There's also a chapter test on the page right after the review problems, and this has a nice sample of the types of questions you're going to be asked on the test. So you might consider trying some of these out, at least looking at them and making sure you know how to answer them, so that when I ask you those same types of questions on the test, you're ready for them. I will see you tomorrow.